Jaws for the NES, developed by Western Bit Entertainment and released in November of 1987 by LJN, maker of toys. You might be somewhat familiar with those folks. The general idea behind Jaws is simple. Guide your boat around the ocean until you hit something. What that something is, nobody knows, but somebody does care because they send a lone diver to check it out. And this is the main meat of the game. Killing innocent sea life while collecting conch shells to trade at a port for a receiver to track down Jaws, as well as incremental upgrades to your weapon to deliver more damage. It's about as exciting as it sounds. The problem with Jaws is that for better or worse, the gameplay doesn't really change all that much. You hit something, dive into the water, shoot the same jellyfish, stingrays, and other assorted sea life over and over again. After a while, you're back on the boat, and you repeat the whole process all over again. You hit something, you kill more sea life, and it's not at all exciting. It gets boring, and after a while, you start to doze off. I guess that's what the game counts on to contribute to the overall difficulty of the game, as the enemies in this game are so easy to sidestep that losing focus and falling asleep are pretty much the only ways to run into an enemy. Even the sea map segments where you're riding your boat around is rather pointless, as you're merely going back and forth between the two ports to trade those shells in for additional power. There's not really much else to do beyond this. There's not much in terms of exploration. It's go to this port, go to that port. Ugh, who cares? Every so often you'll come face to face with Jaws, who will take 1,000,000 hits to die, and is about as much of a non-threat as anything else in this game. And the kicker is that if you don't kill off Jaws within the time allotted, he'll gradually restore a chunk of his health meter for each round you don't kill him off. So in essence, if you take a dive for a couple rounds and you don't encounter Jaws, he'll be fully healed and you'll have to start dwindling that health bar back to nothing all over again. Lame. If you do manage to drain his life meter to 0, you still have this first-person final battle where you use a strobe to stab Jaws in the heart, and that ends the game. If you miss all your strobes, you'll go back to the map, you have to start the whole thing all over again. It's a nice concept, but the execution's worthless. Timing's hard to get down, and sometimes the hit detection's a bit wonky. If this is supposed to make the gameplay more interesting and varied, it's 0 for 2 on that count. Control-wise, controlling your boat's simple enough, you're just moving around with a D-pad. Controlling your diver's simple enough as well. D-pad to move around, a button to shoot. Yippee! You have to take momentum into account when you're swimming, but moving around isn't really an issue with Jaws. Rather, it's staying awake that's really the problem here. It's playable and functional to a point, but doesn't give you much of a reason to give it anything more than a quick playthrough to try it out, and put it aside afterwards. All in all, it's not one of the worst games in the NES library, and certainly not one of the worst games to bear the Rainbow of Death, but outside of extremely mild curiosity, there's really no point in playing this game for any extended period of time. It's sorta just there, so just leave it be and move on to something else. Anything else would be a lot better.
Right, so what you just heard was audio cult from an old video review I did of this thing back in 2013. That was 13 years ago, for fuck's sake. When Jaws was just another piece of disposable licensed fare on NES that people mostly knew through world-famous online sensation and purveyor of crappy video games, I am of course referring to the Irate Gamer. So why are we talking about this very old game that came out 39 years ago based on the last of the Jaws films that came out roughly the same time? Well, because last month, perennial snake oil merchants Limited Run Games unleashed their latest assault on the rapidly deteriorating state of human intelligence under the guise of supposed game preservation in the form of the Jaws Retro Edition, which comes in both regular box for PS5 or Switch, or in a collector's version that features a bunch of gimmicks that will set you back about $100, take about 6 to 8 months to ship, and by the time you actually get it, you're left wondering, what the fuck is this? Because by then you'll have completely forgotten about it. But I digress. I went for neither option and opted for the digital release via Switch eShop because it was the cheaper option. And probably even cheaper on Steam if you want to go that route, but is it really worth it? The short answer is no, not really. The long answer is, I don't know, maybe. So this retro edition includes two versions of the game that you could play. You have the original NES release and its rather empty looking title screen because they removed all the original logos and copyright text and couldn't be bothered to update that information on there. I guess they ran out of budget or something. Anyway, it's all the same game that we all know and played, as it was in 1987 for better or worse, not much else to say there. And then you have the enhanced version, which is basically an extensive ROM hack of the original game that we'll touch on in a little bit, but both versions are running off a basic emulator thing. You could adjust screen size, apply screen filters, and you also have convenient save state and rewind features for those who need them. No button remapping, which is kinda lame, but you do have an art gallery to preview the edited box art and the instruction manual for the original NES game, as well as a music player to sample the game's rather limited and mediocre chiptunes. But yeah, let's get into the Enhanced Edition, which basically takes a fairly shallow game that you could probably clear in less than half an hour, being generous there, and stretches that out into something that takes a few hours to clear. The general gameplay remains the same. You move your boat around the sea, and whenever you hit something, you dive in and clear away some sea life before moving on. Though the game now gives you the option to return the boat by swimming to the surface and pausing the game, so that's a nice thing to have. Another nice thing is you now have on-screen icons denoting various sea life on the map, so you can now attempt to chase these encounters down or avoid them entirely. Slaying sea life and collecting conch shells will now net you cash, which you can use to spend on upgrades to your power, speed, and energy. That's right, you're no longer a one-hit wonder, you have a health meter, and once that's empty, you die and restart back at port. Sometimes you'll be tasked with additional objectives that will earn you some specific upgrades like auto fire, sonar, extra shots, or even oxygen tanks to kill that smiling bitch of a There are 4 phases in the game for you to complete, each phase loosely based on a Jaws film, of which there were 4, even though they retconned the 3rd movie out of existence, so it really only should be 3, but yeah, it's the same deal as Friday the 13th on NES. You drain Jaws' health, you shoot him with the thing, and then you move on to the next phase. And you also get a password for your efforts to continue your game at a later time. Mind you, it's kinda useless when you're playing on an emulator with save states, but I think there's also a reproduction card of this thing on offer or something, or maybe someone can rip the thing and play it on their EverDrives or something like that, I don't know. The key thing is that each phase resets your stats and equipment back to default, but you can reuse whatever funds you have to build up your stats back up, and you're doing the same deal over and over again, except this time you have stronger, more aggressive sea life to contend with, and even Jaws becomes more of a threat in subsequent phases. So here's the thing, right? All these additions and adjustments make Jaws a somewhat more fleshed out game in the sense that it expands on the concept that was merely teased in the original release. Whereas before you merely collected conch shells to increase your power level, now you earn money to spend on various upgrades, and you also have secondary objectives to complete in order to attain other enhancements, which gives it more of that light RPG aspect. In one way, that gives Jaws a level of depth it previously lacked, and theoretically adds more play value. What once took a brief swing to beat is now a multi-hour affair with a more defined narrative structure, and that's an undertaking that's nicely appreciated. That said, I can't help but feel that all these changes have done is stretch out what was originally a really shallow game to merely a much longer stretch. They fleshed out the bits that could have used fleshing out, sure, save for the one aspect that really needed it, the actual meat and potatoes of the package, the core gameplay, which remains the same shallow, repetitive drivel that it's always been. Sure, as you progress through the phases, enemies take more hits and patterns change, but the way those bits play out don't. You're still doing the same thing, still shooting the same sprites, still sailing the same sea, still swimming those bland, uninteresting stages, except now whenever you start a new phase, you're actually worse off than you were in the NES original, and in the last phase where enemies hit like a brick wall and are just as tough to kill, that can be a bit overwhelming, and by that point you're just wondering if it's even worth the effort. Which is too bad because that 4th phase is when the game is at its most interesting because it's done teasing you with the fun stuff, and that's when you have depth charges and super subs and things of that nature, but those weren't in the earlier movies, so you're stuck with And look, I don't want to be completely down on this because I do appreciate the ambition if not the effort in taking an originally maligned game and making it more palatable. It's a common thread in the ROM hacking community of sorts. But sometimes there's only so much you could do to polish a turd. And it's hard not to feel a bit slighted when what was advertised as a significantly improved version of a shallow title turns out to be 15 minutes of substance stretched out to 3 to 4 hours of playtime. But hey, if you beat the game, you get credits, you get timed, and you get a rank. So that's something, I guess, right? I'd wonder if there's a hidden 5th phase covering Cruel Jaws if you beat this mode fast enough, but actually I don't wonder, I really don't care either way. Also, nobody is going to get that. Being that this is just a ROM hack running under an emulator, expect the usual sprite flicker to occur whenever too much is happening on screen, which will happen often, especially in the later segments. The graphics are left untouched in this new version, nice looking map screen with some new icons, tiny looking sprites and boring background scenery for the in-game bits, same deal with the audio, nice 8-bit Jaws theme, mediocre repetitive music, and some generally ho-hum sound effects. Overall, Jaws Retro Edition is a currently convenient means of revisiting a vintage release from the NES days while also offering an updated version that provides a nice what could have been had the original developers been given more time or resources to produce a more fleshed out title. The end result is certainly a considerable update over the original, but underneath all that, it's still the same old crusty game, and, well, if you enjoyed Jaws on NES, you'll get a kick out of the new versions, no doubt. But if you thought the old version was dull and boring, then not even the shiny new bits are going to change your mind on that. And really, that depends on how much nostalgia, I guess, you have for that original NES release, because otherwise, I really don't know what to tell you other than your mileage may vary, and tread carefully in untested waters. The only other thing I could say is that I got this retro edition, I got my 3 to 4 hours of mileage, and then I moved on. Make of that what you will.